The first time billionaire Richard Hayes laid eyes on the little girl who would change his life, she was tiptoeing behind her mother through the marble hallway of his sprawling Long Island estate. She wore a faded hoodie 2 sizes too big, carrying a bag that looked heavier than she was, and yet her eyes, they didn't dart around like a timid child's. They studied, measured. She had that quiet alertness of someone who had learned to stay small in other people's spaces. That afternoon, Richard had just flown in from Tokyo after a business deal worth billions fell through. His jet lag was brutal, but what exhausted him most wasn't the time difference, it was the charade. Smiles with daggers behind them, handshakes that hid greed, the suffocating pretense of wealth. So when his estate manager Charles wrinkled his nose and said, "Sir, the housekeeper has brought her daughter again," Richard waved him off. But an idea flickered in his mind. In business, he'd learned more about people watching them when they thought no one was paying attention than in any boardroom conversation. So he went to his study, that dark-paneled sanctuary filled with priceless artifacts and first-edition books, and he did something unusual for a man like him. He reclined in his leather chair, angled his head just so, and pretended to sleep. He heard them enter. Her mother's soft voice whispered apologies to the empty room as she dusted quietly. Then the faintest creak of the door again, and in stepped the girl. She froze when she saw him slumped there motionless. Instead of running, she crept closer, her expression curious, not fearful. She adjusted the blinds so the sun wouldn't glare on his face. She eyed the thermostat and raised the temperature a notch. Then, with the care of someone touching something sacred, she picked up the folded throw blanket and draped it over his legs. He could barely feel her small hands smoothing it out. She tidied his messy stack of papers, moved his cold coffee cup to a coaster, and whispered so softly it barely carried "Sweet dreams, Mr. Hayes. Mama says you work too hard." He stayed perfectly still as she slipped out of the room, but inside something cracked. In 5 minutes, that little girl had shown him more genuine kindness than half the business world had in years. The next day, he set a trap of sorts. This time, he placed his rare chess set, hand-carved ivory pieces, gifted to him by a world champion, on the side table locked in a notoriously tricky endgame he'd been stuck on for days. He repeated his act, feigning deep sleep. When the girl entered, she froze again, her gaze landing on the chessboard. Richard watched through the narrowest slit of an eyelid as she leaned closer, her fingers hovering over the pieces but never touching. The Fischer-Spassky match, she murmured almost reverently. For 10 minutes, she studied the board, lips moving silently, eyes darting like a hawk tracing prey. Then she took a pencil from her bag, scribbled something on a sheet of paper, and placed it beside the board with his gold letter opener holding it down. After they left, Richard sat up and read the note. In neat looping handwriting, she'd outlined a 17-move sequence, including a rook sacrifice that at first glance looked insane. He played it through, and his breath caught. She was right. She'd found a line he'd missed completely. He checked her name, Maya Carter, 12 years old, the daughter of his cleaning lady. That night, he searched her chess.com username, QueenBM. His jaw tightened as he scrolled through hundreds of games, some against international masters, even a few grandmasters. She was beating them. This wasn't luck. This was raw, blistering genius, and nobody knew. The next day, Richard confronted Evelyn, Maya's mom, gently. "Why hasn't she competed?" Evelyn lowered her gaze. "We don't have the money, sir. Tournament fees, travel. It's a lot. And even if we did those places, they're not meant for kids like her." Richard understood more than she knew. He'd come from a trailer park in Detroit, clawing his way into a world that once laughed at him. He saw the same fire in Maya's eyes. When his own daughter Isabel sneered that Maya was just the help's kid, Richard's temper flared. He invited Maya into his study. "Play me," he said simply. Evelyn paled. Maya's hands trembled, but she nodded. 90 minutes later, Richard tipped over his king. "You're extraordinary," he murmured. That was the moment everything shifted. He pulled strings to get Maya an assessment at Preston Academy, the most exclusive private school in the state, the one that churned out senators and CEOs like a factory. She arrived in her cleanest jeans, hands folded nervously in her lap. The school's chess director, Mrs. Whitmore, barely hid her disdain. Self-taught, she scoffed. We only take students with proper backgrounds. But Richard insisted on a match. Maya dismantled their junior varsity captain in 28 moves. Then she beat the varsity captain, then the state champion. Each game left the spectators pale and stunned. Yet when it was over, Mrs. Whitmore smiled tightly. Impressive, she said, but she's not a cultural fit. Richard clenched his fists. He didn't argue, not yet. 2 weeks later, he hosted a lavish dinner for New York's elite. Crystal chandeliers glimmered over 50 guests, wine glasses clinked, and his daughter's boyfriend, a Yale law student and self-proclaimed chess expert, boasted loudly. Chess mastery requires breeding refinement. In Russia, they cultivate talent systematically. Here, it's too democratized. His laughter was smug. We haven't had a Fisher in decades. Richard's eyes flicked to Maya, quietly serving desserts in her uniform. Why don't you play her? He suggested. The room went silent. The young man chuckled. Come on, sir. That's cruel, afraid Richard asked mildly. A ripple of laughter. Money started exchanging hands. Maya sat at the board, her expression calm, but her hands steady. Within 10 moves, murmurs rose around the table. By move 32, she sacrificed her queen. Gasps echoed. 3 moves later, checkmate. The room erupted. The Yale boy stammered excuses while Maya softly explained where he'd gone wrong, offering to teach him. That humility broke something in the crowd. Richard stood revealing Preston's rejection letter on the big screen, highlighting the words cultural fit. This, he said, his voice cutting through the chatter, is why we lose brilliance in this country. Then he announced the Hayes Chess Foundation pledging $1 million himself. Donations poured in $258 million within minutes. The next day, Richard marched into Preston's boardroom with footage of Maya's assessment. You rejected a future world champion because she didn't fit. One by one, donors he'd called in advance entered the room. Even Margaret Ashford, whose family had founded the school, spoke up. My grandfather once tried to bar Capablanca from playing in New York because he was Cuban, she said. I won't repeat his mistake. By the end of the meeting, Preston's headmaster and Mrs. Whitmore were fired. Maya was granted a full scholarship and a diversity initiative was launched with millions in funding. But for Maya, the battle had just begun. She walked through Preston's halls with whispers following her classmates, glaring, some openly hostile. Yet she stayed composed, answering teachers with quiet confidence. And when the chess team captain challenged her, she beat the entire team simultaneously in a consultation game, then taught them exactly how she'd done it. Even her biggest critics found themselves leaning forward, pencils scratching furiously as she spoke. Her rise was meteoric. Months later, at the National Youth Chess Championship, she faced players who'd been coached since toddlerhood. Cameras followed her every move. Commentators doubted her ability to hold her own. In the final round against a Harvard-bound prodigy, Maya played a move that wasn't in any database, any engine's top line. Commentators scrambled to analyze as she leaned back calm as still water. 10 moves later, her opponent extended his hand. Congratulations, champion, he said softly. As the crowd erupted, Maya's eyes found a group of young black girls pressed against the railing, watching with awe. She took her medal off and placed it around one girl's neck. It's for anyone brave enough to learn, she said. The clip went viral overnight. Suddenly, Maya wasn't just a chess star. She was a symbol. The Hayes Foundation opened training centers across underserved neighborhoods. Preston's culture transformed with kids from all backgrounds filling its halls. Maya became both student and teacher, mentoring others while breaking records herself. She met Maurice Ashley, who offered to coach her personally, and Judith Polgar, who partnered with her to build an international network for overlooked talent. Yet for all the headlines, Richard never forgot the small act that started it all, the quiet kindness of a child who thought no one was watching. One rainy evening, sitting in his study, he told her, I thought I was testing you that day. Turns out you were testing me. And all of us. She smiled. The hardest part of chess isn't seeing the obvious moves. It's having the courage to make the quiet ones that change everything. Months later, at a ceremony honoring her former Preston administrators approached humbled. We were wrong, they admitted. Maya forgave them, insisting they deserved a second chance to help other overlooked kids. The audience rose in a standing ovation as Maurice handed her a worn notebook, Bobby Fischer's own annotations. "Pass this to the next American who changes chess," Fischer's estate had said. "That's you." That night, as the foundation's banner hung above hundreds of children playing chess in what used to be an abandoned warehouse, Richard stood beside Maya at the window. "You've started something bigger than chess," he murmured. "We started it," she corrected softly. "Now every kid like me will know they don't need luck to be seen." Outside, thunder rumbled, but it felt cleansing, like the sky itself was applauding. In that room, a girl who'd once been dismissed as just the maid's kid had become a teacher of champions, a breaker of chains. And somewhere in a dimly lit classroom or a crowded apartment, another child picked up a pawn for the first time, ready to prove the world wrong. Tell me, have you ever underestimated someone only to realize they were a giant hiding in plain sight? Or maybe you've been that person fighting for a seat at a table that was never meant for you. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Share this story if it moved you. And let's start a conversation about what talent really looks like. Because sometimes all it takes is one quiet move to change the entire game,